Hello, very good to have your company. Now, what is the answer to reducing wealth inequality? For decades, perhaps hundreds of years, many have suggested it is as easy as high taxes on the rich and give more of what comes out to the poor. But more progressive ideas are being discussed by such people as billionaire Bill Gates. Can the rich be trusted to come up with a plan that benefits us all? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. A few weeks ago in Davos at the World Economic Forum, there was a lot of debate about equality. One journalist brought up the topic of tax avoidance, and he said the reaction was aggressive from the business elite. Will taxing the rich solve the world's economic problems?
The 26 richest billionaires are worth as much as the poorest 3.8 billion people in the world. Last year, the wealth of the 2,208 billionaires across the globe increased by 900 billion. That's 2.5 billion a day. At the World Economic Forum last month, historian Rutger Bregman suggested one way to reduce inequality was to tackle tax avoidance. In the US, left-leaning politicians such as Bernie Sanders have long proposed restructuring the tax code. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says America should tax incomes above 10 million at a 70% rate. But Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates says targeting high-income brackets misses the point. He supports more progressive taxes, such as the estate tax and taxes on capital and social security. Could higher taxes work, or will they just create more tax dodgers and offshore accounts?
Okay, so let's get chatting. Joining me at the round table, we have Robert Palmer, who is Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. We have Irem Guciri, Research Fellow at Said Business School, that's in Oxford. David Clarke with us too, from Positive Money, which campaigns for what it hopes will be a fairer banking system. And Chloe Wesley here too, Campaign Manager at UK Taxpayers Alliance. Quick round the table first of all. Who thinks they're paying just the right amount of tax and not a penny too much or too little?
I mean, I think if you look at public services in
and
this
not
country,
personal point of view.
Yeah, personal point of view, I think I should pay more tax.
Okay, wonderful.
You can donate to HMRC if you want to.
Yes, but I don't think tax should be about a charitable gift. I think it's about one of our basic contributions.
Okay, but you want to pay more tax, you can pay more tax. Chloe will give you the address. Irem, do you think you pay the right amount of tax?
Well, I'm an academic, and well, I do pay the right amount of tax, perhaps, but it all depends. The optimal tax is what I'm going to come to it from.
Okay, so I'm getting the consultant's perspective, but what about from a personal perspective when you go out and you see how much tax has been taken off at the end of the month? Too much, too little, or just about right? Quick one.
It's all right.
That's okay. You want to pay more? It's pretty much okay. Where do we go here?
I think I could be paying a bit more tax, but there's people richer than me that certainly could.
More tax, just about right. Chloe?
I think if I was given more of my money to keep and less on tax, I could give more to charity.
Therefore, you think you're paying too much tax.
A little bit too much.
You'd rather have more money in your pocket. Okay, so we've got a bit of a split. Nobody except Irem seems to think that it's actually sort of okay.
Can I stop you in that?
Wait a minute, you can come back on this one. Let's kick off with this one. Who thinks there is a place somewhere in the world where the system is absolutely bang on?
Well, I don't think there's a society which has nailed this yet. I don't think there's a perfect tax code out there. But I certainly prefer tax codes which are simpler. I think when you have more tax simplification, it's a lot more difficult for companies to avoid tax because, of course, if you're a really large corporation, and we're seeing this happening in the UK, you can hire an entire compliance team to find loopholes in the rules to avoid that tax. And the small businesses have to pay the taxes. And there's a bit of resentment there.
This again was the quick fire round. Okay, is there a place, we'll get into sort of where it can be changed. Is there a place that's got it right?
Yeah, I think if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries, they consistently top happiness surveys. And they have higher taxes, they have more public services, and they're happier for it. So, I mean, I don't think they're perfect, and, you know, I don't think any country in the world can be described as perfect. But I do think there are places we can look at.
Okay, so emulate the Scandis.
So actually, I think the domestic tax systems around the world are broken. and we need a more principled approach to taxes. We have many different types of tax. And for example, if we think of, say, your salary, if TRT World is paying you, say, £60,000 gross income.
Per program.
Per program.
Yeah,
Per program.
Yeah,
of course. Sorry. Yes. But let's just think that it's so your annual salary, you would be paying twice as much tax as you would if you earned that income from gains on your gains on capital, which is like if you bought shares and sold them and then made some gains at £60,000. It is.
I don't want to get too pointy-headed at this particular point. I know we will get into the financial intricacies of this, but are there countries such as Scandinavia that have got it right from a business point of view because you work for a business school?
Well, I disagree with saying that any country has got it right at the moment, and I do sympathize with the idea that there are countries out there which make individuals pay high taxes at the top rates, and sort of the top income earners should be paying more taxes, etc. But then I think we're very far away from a rate discussion at the moment. We are at a point where we should be thinking about what are the principles under which we should tax individuals, firms, and solving the discrepancies among these different types of tax. There's currently disregard for the interrelationships between different types of taxes. Why is an employee taxed differently than a self-employed, who is also taxed differently than a corporation? And then there are all different types of incentives.
You're underlining how complicated it all is, and I think the one thing I got from looking at the notes before the programme is there isn't a single one of you that thinks there is a proper system. Everybody thinks there needs to be reform, but their own type of reform. It's rather like there are far too many cars on the road except for mine.
It's also, the problem is that you can design the world's perfect domestic tax system, but then it will be undermined by offshore tax havens where at the moment 10% of the world's GDP is hidden away.
Is it possible to internationalise the system?
It is, actually. And there are efforts in that direction at the moment. So we cannot stop Bermuda from charging 0% personal income tax. And we can't stop the US from charging a lower tax rate to, say, £80,000 of income relative to the UK, for example. You would pay more tax as a UK taxpayer than a US taxpayer, given the current system after the US tax reform. We cannot stop this because that's a natural force of competition, tax competition between countries. But what we can change is exchange of information. We can get countries to say, well, I'm going to tax individuals based on their residence. So if I'm a UK resident, and there's the whole problem with like non-domicile status, etc. But let's leave that aside. And we fix the system. If we fix the system, then we can.
There are more conversations between countries about whether people are actually playing by the rules.
Exchange of data.
Yeah. Okay. And would that be fairer, do you think?
Well, I don't know. When people talk about international tax policy, I mean, who is monitoring this? Who is in charge? Who is in the committee room saying, here's how things should be? And I worry about what that would do for democratic accountability. I think it's within the rights of a nation state for the people to elect a government to change tax policy as and when they believe that it should be changed. So the EU at the moment are talking about tax harmonisation. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. I think it should be up to Ireland to have lower taxes to encourage business, and same for the UK. So I do think that tax policy should be a domestic issue, but open to being counted on that argument.
Let's talk about this from a practical point of view, a moral point of view, and then a financial point of view. And from the practical point of view, is there any government that has ever been voted into power on the basis of we're going to take more of your taxes? The second part of that is, would big business stay in a country that was going to tax it more, or would it go somewhere else?
And so on the first point.
Okay, quick one, and then the practical side.
Yeah, but on the practical side, I mean, you do see governments, and again, I'll point to Scandinavia, where people are proud to pay relatively high taxes because they know that they get decent public services in return for them. So you can get electoral gains based on parties saying, we're going to tax you more. And yeah, we should definitely
have big corporations rushing to move to Denmark or to Norway, do you?
No, but somewhere like Germany has got a much higher corporate tax rate than we do here in the UK, and has got a kind of like big manufacturing sector, whereas here in the UK, our manufacturing sector is going to be undermined. And what's interesting around corporation tax is this government has consistently cut corporation tax.
This government being the one we have in the UK.
This government in the UK, and yet you have even business lobby groups, like the big business lobby groups saying, oh no, we don't need to, the tax rate to be cut as low as it's going. So I do think people get the basic premise. I mean, it's really simple, that if you want decent services, if you want your kids to go to school and have a good education, if you want to get rid of potholes, you need to pay the tax to fund those services.
Or not drive such big, heavy tractors.
Well, I mean, that's
cars.
another argument.
That's another story. From a financial and indeed practical point of view, does it work to tax people heavily? What happens if you suddenly put a big amount of tax on a major company in this country that you don't believe is paying enough at the moment? It'll go somewhere else.
So my point is really not about the rate discussion. It's really not a rate discussion. And all these conversations revolve around the rates, 70% AOC. Then you can say, oh, let's slash taxes. Let's just give these concessions to big firms or rich individuals. Doesn't matter whose rate we're talking about. We are in an unprincipled tax system, and that's the problem. If you say I'm going to reform the tax system, that attracts investment, because business like consistency. Business likes to be able to see what's ahead of them. In a way, to be able to attract these businesses, one element is the whole general sort of business friendliness of the environment. It's not just tax anyway. The second thing is, though, the tax predictability. So if you keep changing things all the time, and then if you have to spend a lot of your resources on tax planning, that's not efficient for anyone. It's not efficient for business. It's not efficient for non-domiciled individuals. Not efficient for either of us, because then we're paying too much tax.
What we're driving at here, and do say whatever you want while I make this sort of point. What we're driving at here is there a way of making sure that everybody gets what they want? Which is, the government wants more money, people want more services, we want to know more about the future, less uncertainty. Is there any way of doing that?
On the politics of it, people want to know that they're getting a fair deal. So it's not unreasonable that people are reluctant to pay more tax if at the same time, if ordinary people don't want to pay more tax, if at the same time we're cutting corporation tax or cutting the top rated tax for the highest earners. So I think, as Rob says, if people feel that they're getting a fair deal, that the higher rates of tax are going towards building public services, building collective institutions, then people are okay with that. But it's when they see wealth being accumulated with the rich, some people seeming to get away with paying very little tax at all, that people get hacked
But do
off.
rich people create wealth for poorer people, do you think?
I think that...
So if Charlie makes, 100 billion a year, does it really matter if he employs 100,000 people who all are so much better off because of that?
I think this is an important question about kind of where we look to prioritise where we're taxing. At the moment, a lot of what's going on in the UK economy is actually not it's kind of unproductive economic activity. We're too orientated towards financial speculation and the property market. And we should be looking to have a tax policy that reorientates our economy towards the kind of job-creating businesses that...
Because I want to get into the Bill Gates type of discussion, where he says don't tax personal wealth, don't tax it immediately, but make sure that there are taxes elsewhere. And I'm led to look at this case, Britain's richest man moving to Monaco to save. This is a headline, this is not me stating it, to quote, save 4 billion in tax. That's Jim Radcliffe, Sir Jim Radcliffe. How do you prevent the wealthiest people from taking their money away from the country? And has Bill Gates
prevent him from going
Well, you
away.
don't want him to take the money away from the country, do you? How do you encourage him not to? Let me put it that way.
I think we have more control over the global tax system than a lot of people kind of recognise. A lot of the world's leading tax havens are UK overseas territories, which we clearly do have kind of some say over their policies. So I think we should be taking a much harder line.
We're talking about places like the Caymans?
The Caymans, yeah, or closer to home, the Isle of Man, Jersey. We should be taking a much harder
But I
line.
was reading not so very long ago, a few years ago, that that wasn't going to be the case with Jersey and the Channel Islands, et cetera, because there would be tax reporting from there, and everybody who had an account there would have to tell the British government, HMRC, that they did have it.
That's precisely what I was referring to in terms of international
Yeah.
cooperation. We cannot, that's why I said we cannot stop Bermuda from setting personal tax rates at 0%. But what we can do is, if the person whose income arises in Bermuda, then you can say, I'm a UK taxpayer, and I would like international collaboration on exchange of information between the tax havens and you know, all the other countries. And
What's
there are
in it for
sanctions.
Bermuda?
They can be blacklisted if they don't do it.
Oh, in other words,
There are
we'll put you in
other-
the naughty corner.
No, but then they
Right.
have other incentives. There are lots of hedge funds, lots of financial institutions that have non-tax reasons to use these kinds of places to do their business, channel their money through these places. So that's actually not necessarily...
So you punish them if they don't cooperate. How do you get them to cooperate without punishing them?
I think it's an international consensus.
Do you think it'll work? Anybody?
idea.
I mean, it has worked. We've seen since the financial crisis that countries have put pressure on some of the tax havens to open up and to share information. So, you know, our sense at Tax Justice UK is it's now...
Give our viewers instances.
Yeah, so that it's now harder to hide your money offshore from the tax man. That countries, a whole load of countries, including Bermuda, have signed up to automatically exchanging tax information. So that's, you know, that makes it harder to do the kind of like really dirty illegal stuff. The stuff you're talking about with Jim Ratcliffe is different, and from my perspective, I think it's sad that someone has effectively chosen their greed, the fact that they want to keep a bit more money, over their contribution to broader society.
But let me put it this way. Jim Ratcliffe may want to give away a large portion of the money that he keeps by not paying UK taxes, give it away to institutions that he thinks deserve it more than those that are chosen by the British government.
Or
Yeah,
even
and
give his work as a pay rise or invest in research and development. This is what I've noticed in these political discussions. I mean, who around here has ever ran or owned a business?
Sorry, yeah, sort of have actually.
Well, yeah, it's fantastic. But I would have loved to have seen maybe a small business owner or someone who had actually started a business on this panel, because there's so much anti-business bashing at the moment in politics. You get these politicians who have been public servants their whole lives, probably haven't done anything themselves, and berating these business leaders at committees and saying, you know, you greedy person. Business leaders and entrepreneurs, these are the genius people that solve problems in society, that create jobs, that are actually doing something, that are actually moving the economy.
I know
and
you
so I think
disagree
you
with that.
can't
I
have
don't want
this
to get into sort of
anti-business
those
sentiment, this kind of, you know, from Ocasio-Cortez, we must punish the rich. No, we need a simpler tax system that, and an environment that actually encourages businesses
And does
to be
Bill
based here.
Gates' idea bring us a simpler tax system?
Possibly. I think you made some really good points about, we talk about tax rates, but it's not just about how high taxes are, it's about what you tax. And are all taxes fair? Are they all fairly designed? So you have some consumption taxes which actually disproportionately affect poorer people. And you know, you also have other taxes which make it easier to avoid, as I said, if you're a large corporation. I don't think the tax system's really designed for the little guy if you're a smaller business. There's a lot of distrust in the tax system right now, I think.
Isn't it society that's wrong rather than the system? I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful to live in this utopia where nobody paid any taxes unless they wanted to, but you were sort of made to feel that you ought to by your next door neighbour, by members of your family, by the fact that you needed your leg setting in plaster when you broke it. And so you gave what you considered to be the right amount, and society judged you by that. Yeah, look at you. Look at you.
I'm not,
There are experiments
sure if we
that
share...
are along those lines, actually.
that
So for
really-
example, you would have, well, it's more on the paying side, but then you send a letter to sort of taxpayers saying, your neighbor has, you know, in your neighborhood, people have paid X amount of tax, and our records show that you haven't any. And, you know, there are mixed results into, can we nudge people's behavior?
What are those results?
I mean, yeah, it's, there are differing results. I kind of, you know, I would.
So some do, some don't.
Some do, some don't. But usually, I think this type of tax morale kind of, and also sort of, what are they going to do with my taxes? And if my neighbor has paid a lot, then I should pay, doesn't seem to work that much.
See, the point is, if we expect people to impose charges on us, we are probably always going to resent it. If society makes us think that we ought to pay that money because it's right to do so, then that would be wonderful.
I think if you look at the world's richest people, they actually give away a far smaller proportion of their income than the rest of us. I think you just can't rely on people's generosity to support the kinds of public services and investment in the economy that we need.
Those rich people are paying for the public services. Like, they do pay a lot of tax, and you can complain that they're not paying enough, but the majority of income tax is paid for by higher earners. And these are the people that are generating the wealth that pay for public services. So I think, when we talk about wealthy people as if they're these terrible people, I'm sure some of them are avoiding tax, and I'm sure some of them are not good people, but a lot of them are really good people. They've just struck gold, taken a risk, got a great business idea, making millions off of, giving people joy.
Or they're exploiting their workers.
Yeah, but I think I would agree.
No. You've said loads. Come on. You said loads. Your turn.
People can be rewarded generously for, building a business, being successful in business. But there comes a point where if someone is earning, if we talk about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez's policy or Elizabeth Warren's policy, if someone is earning over $50 million a year, it is clearly they are going to get less benefit from any extra dollar that they earn than society as a whole is going to get from raising, $1 trillion over 10 years to pay for climate change mitigation or to eradicate homelessness. Rich people get very little benefit from additional income over a certain level, and it's better that we make the choice about how that money is spent is made by society as a whole.
I think there is a limit in between your position and my position where we both agree there should be a tax system, that people should be taxed. I mean, probably it's about finding that golden mean where you are taxing people so that they're paying for public services in the community, but also not disincentivizing success, because you don't want to put off people risking to start a business. It's a risky endeavor, Some people remortgage their home, they take a big risk. It doesn't always work.
To risk, right? You get the return relative to that risk.
Exactly.
Is it the tax
but if the
system's
government's
job
taking away, well, the highest rate of income tax at the moment is over 50%. And so if that goes to 60, 70%, it doesn't really motivate you much to quit your wage job where you're getting good income for the reward that would happen if you did take that risk.
So are we sort of suggesting that consciences in this instance play very little part unless you happen to be somebody who's philanthropic and has billions and billions to give away, that your conscience doesn't necessarily play a large part in this? It's simply down to practicalities of what system is put in place. And so many different systems, Irene, have been tried. They're sort of rather like amateur systems, aren't they? Let's try a bit of this, let's try a bit of that. Why can't we come up with one uniform policy in this country that everybody agrees is pretty good?
It is a bit of patchwork. The current international tax system dates back to, on the corporate side, 1920s agreement where production was completely different. You wouldn't have a situation where you would produce in one country, market in another country, sell in a different country. And that's why the corporation tax system has been ancient, and now we have to rethink that. On the personal side, things are a bit similar because you can move money around quite easily now, as opposed to carrying them in bags as in the past. So the whole piecemeal kind of response to this.
Are we ever going to see a return? And we've only got a couple of minutes left. Such a big question. Are we ever going to see a return to the idea of the Labour governments of the 1960s in this country, where I think it was Harold Wilson, or perhaps it was James Callaghan, his Chancellor at the time, said, we are going to squeeze the rich until the pips squeak?
I think what Chloe was talking about is a middle ground, which we would agree with. At the moment, the tax system is unbalanced, and we need to be asking the wealthy to pay more. And there are business leaders like Julian Richer who said, or Bill Gates, who put their hands up and say, I should be paying more. And ultimately, tax is about democracy. It's about us coming together as our communities and saying, we want to live in a particular way. We want to collectively provide these services, collectively look after ourselves if we get ill or old, and we're going to pay for that in a fairer way as possible. And for us, fairness would mean asking companies and the wealthy to pay a bit more, but having then a broader conversation about how much all of us are paying in tax.
Is it going to happen?
I think taxing the very wealthy is actually better for the wealthy themselves. It allows people to escape this cycle where they're constantly in competition with each other to earn more, to have even more grotesque displays of wealth with each other, which brings them very little happiness. So if we can tax the wealthy, it will actually make us all happier, including the very rich.
Okay, well, I'll give you Bill Gates' phone number and a couple of other people who've got super yachts down in Monaco, and you can tell them then. Tell them that they were going to be much happier under your system. Final word, Chloe.
I think it's really interesting that there is a moral assumption that the best way you can help people is to give money to the government. Just look at what they're spending it on. I don't think government always has the best method of solving problems. I think local single-issue charities do a great job at solving problems. I think businesses do a great job at solving problems. We need to get away from this idea that the only way to help your fellow human being is to give money to a state bureaucracy so that they can decide how to spend it.
Have we solved anything?
Rethinking the whole system, principled systems, is what I will.
Okay, okay. Well, it's always worth kicking it around, isn't it? Or kicking that can a little bit further down the road. Incidentally, Mr. Gates, Mr. Soros, I don't have your personal number to give out to a member of the Roundtable panel today, so don't worry about that. But I do have the address of HMRC, and we will be putting you in touch with them so that you can send them a cheque for £50,000 tomorrow. Listen, thank you all very much indeed. Great to have your company, and thank you for watching. It's been Roundtable. I'm David Foster. We hope to have you with us next time. Bye-bye.